The man was just heading to town to use the internet, but he ended up surrounded by the FBI. It turned out an ancient wolf king was lunging at his back. Sensing the danger, the man instinctively tried to cast a spell, only to realize his demonic energy had completely vanished. In desperation, he grabbed the wolf king's head. With one head smash, he left the wolf unrecognizable even to its own mother. The soldiers were completely stunned by the scene. Was he even human? He defeated a monster that usually required a full police squad. Little did they know the young man before them had once been Asgard's bravest warrior. Not only did he clear out all the demon caves alone, he even stood up to the intimidating Saintess herself. Even without his demonic energy now, his physical strength alone was enough to handle these minor threats. As they traveled, the soldiers explained to him, this area had long been classified as a no-go zone. Because of riots 2 years ago, the frequency of dungeon appearances had skyrocketed. With this came more and more gigantic monsters. The originally balanced world was completely disrupted. The military could no longer fully control the dungeons. As a result, some civilian areas had to be sealed off. However, the man wasn't particularly interested in these details. What he cared about was whether the company behind the dungeon game and their servers were still operational. But the following news came as a heavy blow to him. The good news was that the dungeon game still existed. Even the internet cafe he called a gamer's paradise was open, operating as usual. However, when the man checked online, he confirmed the soldier's words were true. And that was Kim Min-jun, returning after 2 years, had reached the age for mandatory military service. And the current rules required a 5-year term for both the regular army and the Hunter Corps. This also meant the man's desperate plans to return and play his game were completely shattered. As for serving in the army or joining the Hunter Corps, the man didn't particularly care. If he still had his powers from Asgard, he could easily handle all the monsters. Even without magic, it wouldn't be much trouble for him, because during his time in Asgard, the man realized that no matter how powerful a dark mage was, once their demonic energy was depleted, they were doomed. Unlike mages who could naturally recover their mana, required mana had to be obtained by killing specific monsters. But compared to the enormous consumption of using skills, the tiny amount of mana from monsters was barely enough. So without a reliable source of mana replenishment, the only solution the man could think of was to use his fists instead of skills to deal with the monsters. At the National Defense Center the next day, there were indeed many people reporting for military service. However, everyone looked gloomy and downcast, except for the man eating skewers, who looked like he was just out for a casual stroll. With the piercing sound of a horn, the new recruit ceremony officially began. You slackers, why are you moving like snails? The officer on stage began with the usual reprimanding tone. Although he had heard beforehand that military service was different now, could it really be tougher than his days in Asgard? Because of this, when he heard about the annual salary of £3 million as a condition for joining the Hunter Corps, while everyone else remained silent, heads lowered, the man decisively raised his hand. Then, with the sound of cracking floorboards, he leapt over everyone's heads and landed firmly on the stage. Kim Min-jun reporting in. I want to join the Hunter Corps. It turned out that after the man's return from his crossover, his demonic energy had been completely drained. Joining the Hunter Corps was his only chance to access the dungeons. He firmly believed that among those monsters, there must be some carrying demonic energy. Once he regained his lost power, he might quickly rise to become a well-paid hero. Then he could finally enjoy playing the dungeon game in peace. The thought of such a bright future made him ecstatic. The commander eagerly introduced the man who wanted to join the Hunter Corps. Leaping 5 meters onto the stage convinced many that he was an awakened one. However, the sergeant's attitude struck the man as peculiar. Back in Asgard, the man had also accessed his status window. But aside from checking stats, it wasn't very useful. He wondered what the status window would show on Earth. But what he saw caught him completely off guard. A massive error message dominated the screen, hiding all other content. At the same time, when Lee Sung-ho pressed him again, the man truthfully revealed what he had seen. However, this made the sergeant feel as though he was being mocked. Nevertheless, the man was taken to the Hunter Training Center. There were always unqualified hunters who falsified their stats to join the Corps, since there was currently no way to check another person's status window. The training center relied on special tools to verify the truth. Meanwhile, in the building's commander's office, the commander of the Hunter Corps was making an exception by privately summoning a new recruit. Long time no see, Hunter Sun Un-soo. The last time we met was 10 years ago in Sucheon. I'm just a new recruit, not a hunter yet. If you summoned me because of my father, I want to make it clear that I don't want any special treatment during training. The commander reassured her, of course nothing like that will happen. But I admire and appreciate your decision to become a soldier instead of an administrative officer. This country truly needs soldiers like you right now. The sudden praise made Sun Un-soo feel a bit embarrassed. But there's another reason I called you here today. The commander shifted his tone and continued. You might have a very interesting comrade in the future. Would you like to go meet him? The scene shifts. In a spacious room stood a massive red crystal. This was a special tool used to assess the man's abilities. A rare mineral sourced from the dungeons. Facing such a massive crystal, the sergeant instructed the man to move it 1 inch within 10 minutes. Only then would he be considered qualified. Otherwise he would only be assigned as a regular soldier in the military police. What the sergeant couldn't have anticipated was, this material was as common as dirt in Asgard. But the man wasn't planning to simply move it. Who could guarantee it didn't contain demonic energy from the dungeon? In the next moment, a crystal that others couldn't even budge was shattered into pieces with a single punch. Everyone present stared in wide-eyed disbelief. Only the man looked at his now empty palm with regret. From that moment on, no one ever questioned his strength again. What followed was 4 weeks of grueling training. Each day involved climbing the infamous 6,000 steps with heavy loads, while enduring random interference from the instructors as part of the tests. The training was harsh and relentless. This training method, while simple and brutal, was effective in increasing physical stats by 1% daily. As aspiring hunters, everyone was mentally prepared for this. But the one thing they couldn't figure out was, what on earth was up with this guy? Why did he look so relaxed? This made all the new recruits start doubting themselves. What was supposed to be hellish training felt like a vacation to him. It was capable of increasing his stats by 10%. In Asgard he could only eat biscuits and sleep for less than an hour a day. But now, with such luxurious food available, what more could he ask for? More importantly, instead of roll calls after completing tasks, he was rewarded with free time. It was even said that the base had a top-tier computer lab available for use. A job with great pay and time to play games? Wasn't this the dream life? As he became more and more delighted, the man unknowingly reached the mountain summit first. This left the instructor at the finish line dumbfounded. He even questioned if his stopwatch was malfunctioning. Most recruits took an hour to complete this training. The man had done it in just 21 minutes. He even earned an outing reward that no one had ever received before. The outing reward made everyone sigh. This guy is truly a monster. But excellent performance and immense strength aren't everything. The most crucial quality for the Hunter Corps is the ability to react to monsters. Still, he's definitely someone worth watching. In the recruits' dormitory, everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, the man was surrounded by people drawn to his excellence. This long-lost feeling left him momentarily dazed. Having been immersed in the gaming world for so long, he had never had any friends by his side. After arriving in Asgard, his identity as a dark mage made people treat him like a bad omen and avoid him. Now this feeling of being noticed was truly nostalgic. But in the next second, the man suddenly dashed out of the dormitory. It turned out his roommates had casually mentioned the computer lab, and he scolded himself for wasting time in the dorm. Why wasn't he there already? This time he could finally enjoy his gaming world properly. 3 weeks passed in a flash under the same routine. And in the final phase of training, everyone was about to face the dungeon adjustment training. Most dungeons disappear once the monsters inside are cleared. Only a few remain. These remaining dungeons have internal structures that periodically change. As a result, these dungeons became excellent training grounds for soldiers. Hearing this, the recruits who had heard rumors broke out in cold sweats. They knew they were about to face authentic real-life monsters. For those without experience, this would be an enormous challenge. As an officer, the lieutenant naturally understood the recruits' feelings. However, with his extensive experience in leading troops, he had his unique methods. Strict discipline and intense training were essential, but so was appropriate rewards. The top scorer would be awarded a 2-day 3-night holiday pass. Now let's hear your cheers, he declared. Yet the recruits remained completely silent. The awkward atmosphere even made the lieutenant feel uncomfortable. What's wrong with these people? Why isn't anyone reacting? Don't you want to go out, have a beer and enjoy some barbecue with friends? It's a full 2-day 3-night pass. Yet Kim Min-jun remained the most enthusiastic of them all. He truly was the officer's most supportive recruit. As training entered its final phase, the man finally got a chance to approach a dungeon. A military truck roared into view, kicking up a cloud of dust that enveloped everyone. In the haze, they felt as though countless eyes were watching them. When the dust finally settled, the recruits realized it was a cage full of snarling wolves with blue faces and sharp fangs. In an instant, everyone's legs started trembling uncontrollably. Even under the instructor's reprimands, they couldn't hide their fear. To the man, however, they were nothing more than adorable little animals. As for the requirement to form groups of 4 to kill the wolves, it was no big deal. What truly bothered him was the protective armor issued to the recruits. It was an expensive custom-made safety suit for the Hunter Corps. But its value meant each suit had clearly been worn by many others before. The man could smell the sweat clinging to it from a distance. His refusal to wear it was seen as arrogance, and as punishment for his perceived defiance. The man didn't really care, but his teammates were terrified. In response, the man naively thought he could just explain to them how to defeat the monsters. With a serious tone and confident demeanor, he shared his brilliant plan. When the wolves leap at you, just grab their legs, bend them over their backs, and then tear them apart like splitting a cabbage. The man vividly and passionately described his method, but his teammates just stared at him as if he were crazy. "If you hadn't told us, we'd never have guessed." Just then the instructor gave the order and the cages were opened. All the beasts leapt from the truck at once, and charged straight into the dimensional gate leading to the dungeon. The fact that the wolves didn't attack immediately surprised the recruits nearby, but the man understood the reason all too well. Wasn't this exactly how he felt when he desperately wanted to go home? His flawless explanation earned admiration from his teammates. However, the instructor wasn't fond of the recruits slacking off. He immediately urged them to enter the dungeon without delay. Unlike the strict instructors outside, the dungeon had rescue personnel stationed for emergencies. They were ready to respond to any situation. As the four-man team stepped into the dimensional gate, the test officially began. As they ventured deeper, a few shadows darted quickly behind them. The sharp-eyed man was the first to notice the movement. Although he could easily take down these monsters himself, he chose to alert his teammates first, so they could also earn their scores. Man calmly informed them of the situation, and helped them prepare. Facing their panic, the man reassured his teammates with comforting words. He naturally took his position at the front of the group. Unsurprisingly, he became the primary target for the wolves. But the first wolf to attack had no idea that it wouldn't even survive a single punch from this human. Another wolf was sent flying skyward with just one kick. As for the last confused wolf, it was swiftly dealt with by his teammates under his guidance. Its life ended. The recruits found it hard to believe this newcomer wasn't a retired hunter returning to the ranks, but there was no denying Kim Min-jun's excellent performance. He took on a leadership role and helped his team achieve impressive results. With the task complete, the two instructors no longer needed to stay hidden. However, the man's teasing remarks after learning the truth left the instructors slightly embarrassed. But then the ground beneath their feet suddenly began to shake. The exit they were nearing started to visibly distort and shift unnaturally. Before anyone could react, the dimensional gate shut right before their eyes. Their radios lost signal next, eliminating their only means of outside communication. Though the instructors quickly calmed the recruits and assured them the dungeon would reopen in an hour. Was that really the case? Even though this was a training ground for recruits, and the instructors should have contingency plans for emergencies, the man could sense from their expressions that this time, something felt off. Based on his experience in Asgard, if this dungeon truly became a sealed space, escaping wouldn't be an easy task. And as it turned out, the situation was exactly as the man suspected. They were now facing a closed-type dungeon. Unlike dungeons where the entrance vanishes after clearing all the monsters, there's another condition that can cause the entrance to shut. That's when intruders enter a dungeon still inhabited by monsters. The only way to leave is to eliminate every monster inside. This also meant any external attempts to assist would be futile. Given the gravity of the situation, it was no longer possible to hide the truth from the recruits. They needed to unite and prepare for the imminent danger. The instructors understood that, without proper equipment, even fighting low-level goblins would be a challenging task. The only ones fully equipped were these newly enlisted recruits. Could they really use the recruits as cannon fodder? These recruits have trusted us and pushed through until now, and yet as their seniors were considering using them as meat shields. His strong sense of pride made him feel ashamed of the thought. The soldier at the back couldn't possibly imagine that his comrade had just experienced such an intense internal struggle. But in the next moment, the instructor, fresh from his mental battle, suddenly started convulsing. In an instant he collapsed to the ground, foaming at the mouth. The man wanted to intervene, but the other instructor rushed forward, and just like that another instructor collapsed to the ground. Yet the man remained unfazed and continued forward. Not only did he rescue the fallen instructors, but he also resolutely ran deeper into the dungeon. Earlier the man had already sensed something was wrong. When he reached the spot where the instructors had fallen, he detected a familiar scent in the air. It was the paralyzing aura of demonic energy. No wonder even the awakened instructors had succumbed to it. Even in Asgard, soldiers needed protective magic to resist the corruption of demonic energy. Without it they were vulnerable. But for an ordinary person this lethal force was nothing more than a tool for a dark mage. At the end of the passage a thick sinister aura lingered. The unnervingly quiet space showed no trace of any monsters. But to a dark mage, no form of concealment could remain hidden. It was a shadow hound. Man hadn't expected to encounter such an old acquaintance here. When he first arrived in Asgard he almost died at its hands. At that time any attack from Earth was completely ineffective against it. All methods from Earth were useless against it. But now the man was ready to enjoy this delicious treat. As the shadow hound charged toward him, the man sent it to its end with just one punch. As the monster's life faded, the air began to fill with a nauseating smell of blood. Then a dense demonic aura exploded from its body, corrupting all life it touched. This was also why shadowhounds were so difficult for ordinary people to defeat. But to a dark mage, it meant nothing. What puzzled him was, why had an Asgardian hound appeared on Earth? And judging from the instructor's reactions, this was the first time something like this had happened. Normally such creatures shouldn't be able to cross dimensions on their own. It would require divine power like that of a saintess or the use of top-tier black magic. Only then could it be possible. The man wasn't sure if the Shadow Hound had truly appeared for the first time in Korea. Had it really appeared in Korea for the first time? But for now he had to quickly take the corpse and regroup with his teammates. At the entrance the recruit's continuous shouting finally caused the instructor to slowly open his eyes. He opened his eyes. The instructor, regaining his senses, immediately sat up. He quickly asked about the recruit's safety. The instructor immediately lost his composure. A recruit acting without orders like that could be expelled from the military. But then the instructor thought, what right did he have to criticize? He couldn't even protect the recruits and ended up passing out himself. At that moment a loud gasp interrupted his thoughts. It was Kim Min-jun safely returning with the hound's corpse on his back. However, the massive corpse startled everyone. The instructor had guessed the cause of their fainting. This monster looked different from the others. If the ones they had killed before were the lightweight versions, this one was definitely a heavyweight hound. As they discussed, the dungeon entrance opened again. While everyone exited in an orderly fashion, the instructor kept Kim Min-jun behind. Turned out that this incident made him feel deeply guilty. When danger arrived as the instructor, he had fainted first, leaving the recruits to face the danger alone. For this, even if he were sent to military prison, he wouldn't complain. He had no complaints, so he only asked Kim Min-jun to report every detail of what happened here after leaving. After thanking Kim Min-jun for his timely rescue, he was the first to leave. This left the man feeling flattered. He hadn't expected the last week of training to end with such praise. He hadn't anticipated this kind of conclusion. It was a pleasant surprise. However, just as he was about to leave, his status window suddenly popped up uncontrollably. The message "error fixed" popped up, leaving the man confused. He couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't help but feel that this thing was truly useless no matter the world. So stupid and useless. But just as he was rechecking the information, he discovered something outrageous. Something absurd. Why is even this showing up on here? Rumi is actually a character from the dungeon game. Ever since he became the strongest dark mage in Asgard, he has always been surrounded by a group of fanatic followers from the dark magic circles. They've been constantly pestering him. To deal with this, the man specifically created a cult to try to get rid of them. However, things didn't go as planned. The number of fanatic followers increased instead of decreasing. But none of this mattered much. The key issue was that the man realized his attributes seemed to be worse than he expected. It was worse than he had imagined, because after returning he found that the disappearance of demonic energy had weakened him. The weakening effect was clear. What he didn't expect was that so many skills had vanished. Now only one corrosion skill remained, and it was level E. This kind of decay effect probably only caused stomach aches. It was barely enough to cause a stomach ache. This was truly absurd. It felt like something out of a third-rate novel.